This video is based on corporate social responsibility, which ties into business ethics. Now, what I mean by business ethics is the moral guidelines which govern good behaviour. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the business is breaking the law, but what their behaviour and how they're acting might not be morally accurate or morally right, and therefore certain stakeholder groups might be, disadvantaged by the actions of this firm. So, as I've written here, the duties of an organisation towards employees, customers, society, and the environment. Companies that accept their corporate social responsibility usually do so by integrating social and environmental concerns into their business operations and their interaction with stakeholders. So, if for example, if you went on Google and searched, a big brand and wrote, let's say, Tesco's corporate social responsibility, at times they've actually got a web page dedicated to it, and you can have a look at it and you can read over the document, which is there to communicate with their stakeholders in terms of how they are acting and how they're behaving ethically. Now, in terms of ethics and in terms of corporate social responsibility, it is one of these topics that you do see in the news quite, frequently. There's been major issues with, for example, the likes of sweatshop behaviour in the past. The likes of Gap, the likes of Nike have all been accused of maybe unfair treatment of workers. At the moment, McDonald's has been in the news quite a lot in terms of how they treat their workers with regards to maybe wages and low pay. If we think about other ethical factors, again within the UK, it's quite recent. You can look at the likes of tax evasion and, for example, Starbucks not finding loopholes in the tax system within the UK in terms of corporation tax. And again, the loopholes at the time might not have been considered illegal, but they were not paying their fair share of tax. If you consider a few years back now, the Findus scandal with the horse meat. Again, is there anything wrong with eating horse meat? Obviously not, okay? However, the labelling and the information that was provided to customers was completely inaccurate and it was false. So therefore, it suggests that there's a lack of trust as to where this food is coming from and the supply chain involved. So all these type of ethical factors would go against perhaps their corporate social responsibility. Now, because obviously it's a hot topic, many entrepreneurs have discussed the notion of CSR and ethics, and we've got three here. So, for example, Niall Fitzgerald, the former CEO of Unilever, a key quote, a quite well-known quote. So, corporate social responsibility is a hard-edged business decision, not because it's a nice thing to do or because people are forcing us to do it, because it is good for our business. So again, you could read into that how you will. Is it good for their business in terms of their reputation and again, making sure that their share value and making sure that nothing, hurts that business. Then you've got obviously Anita Roddick for Body Shop. The business of business should not be about money. It should be about responsibility. It should be about public good, not private greed. So this one's slightly different to the last quote, and this one's doing it more to do with actually helping society, wanting to help society, and creating businesses that should. The whole purpose is to kind of aid society. And then you got Warren Buffett, okay, very, very well known, like hedge fund manager or investor. It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it, which again, we've seen this with many firms where they've found it very, very difficult to kind of regain that reputation and maybe amend what's happened in terms of their ethical behaviour. So, what should CSR involve? Well, conducting businesses in an ethical way and in the interests of the wider community. And again, this will be communicated within their corporate social responsibility document. Responding positively to emerging societal priorities and expectations, a willingness to act ahead of regulatory confrontation, and balancing shareholder interests against the interests of the wider community. And again, just being a good citizen. So, you can look at it from the point of view, it relates to lots of different stakeholders, and it relates to lots of different ethical concerns. But it's all to do with, being morally correct. Now, some of the stakeholders that businesses should be concerned about is obviously one of the key ones is the customer. So again, some of the factors could be: is it value for money, or are they exploiting customers in terms of prices? If you think about, for example, companies in the dominant firms, even some that could be accused of monopoly power, if there's a lack of competition, then they probably can charge whatever they want to charge because they know that there's nowhere else for customers to switch. So again, that would be considered unethical because they are trying to exploit that customer. Fair and honest advertising. There's been quite a lot of companies that have been again accused of providing false information within their marketing. Again, it could be to do with the country or the place of origin. So again, in terms of it could relate to the expectations of where that product maybe should be manufactured. It could be to do with where that product is manufactured, what the labour laws like, again, what are the political issues within that country. So you can look at it from that point of view. If there's a lot of political issues within that country and there's a lot of labour, for example, being exploited, then maybe customers might not be satisfied with where it's being manufactured. Whether it's sustainable or not, again, I've already mentioned labour rights, but labour rights throughout the supply chain. Often, if you think about, I used the example of Findus before. Now, Findus got in a lot of trouble for it. Tesco, that stocked a lot of Findus products, were the first to hit the headlines, even though they weren't the ones that were manufacturing it. Findus, again, outsourced the manufacturing to companies in Eastern Europe. So again, there's arguments, are they responsible? If you think about Primark and the suppliers building that obviously collapsed in Bangladesh, there's arguments. Well, it wasn't Primark, it wasn't Findus. However, have they got a responsibility to manage their supply chain and make sure that if they're using suppliers, then those suppliers are actually ethical themselves? As to the product quality and the safety, you could argue in terms of Samsung recently and a lot of their phones, again, there's been reports of them blowing up. That could be an issue. What is happening with that? Are they, with cars in terms of some of the faults? Yeah, a good example of that is if you think about Volkswagen or if you think about Mitsubishi, they've both been obviously accused or proved to be lying about their gas mileage. So you can look at it in terms of that, it's false information to the customer to try and encourage a sale. And again, it's deceitful. In terms of product testing, so animal testing has been one that customers have not been too happy about, especially in terms of makeup. And it could be just the after-sales service, for example, for handling complaints. And again, just the availability of information. So it might not be necessarily about false information, but actually, is there enough information? Other stakeholder groups as employees, I've already mentioned McDonald's. McDonald's have just agreed to increase their pay for workers, and that's because of the pressure from stakeholders. So again, have they got fair treatment at work? Have they got information about working conditions, have they got full disclosure of their contracts and so on? Work-life balance, flexible working. So again, a lot of junior doctors were on strike in the UK because of this work-life balance. Saying at the moment it's unsafe for patients because the junior doctors are being overworked. Train new skills, job designs and satisfaction, attitude to disadvantaged groups. Is there discrimination going on within the workplace? And again, workforce diversity and equal opportunities. That's been a hot topic, even if you think about it in terms of Hollywood, and you think about the sexual harassment that is going on at the moment. Obviously, we think about it as film, but film is a massive industry, and we can think about the issues. Some women choosing not to work with producers because of their behaviour. Some actresses not even being able to find work because they've been warned that they've been hard to work for just because they've said no to advances from management in higher positions. The health and safety, again, that's been a hot topic in developing countries with major brands outsourcing and again, not really necessarily looking at the health and safety laws, or if the health and safety laws are quite limited, not really going above and beyond to help the workers within those factories, for example. Another one is dealing with the community. So in terms of minimising noise and other pollution, I know Heathrow have been in the news quite a lot recently with the expansion of a further runway. You could argue, are they really considering the community? Maybe not. Dealing with the environment, again, that links effects of pollution, noise, waste disposal, congestion, chemical use of energy. If you think about fossil fuel companies, that's a hot topic. If you think about companies that, for example, have had like oil leaks in the past. So, for example, if you think about BP and you think about the massive oil spill that hit the Gulf of Mexico, again, killing a lot of wildlife. Again, another one is carbon emissions, excessive packaging. A lot of chocolate companies and confectionery brands have been accused of that as well, water consumption and so on. Now, I've already mentioned that if you do Google CSR for certain companies, you should find certain information. Now, Tesco's has a whole website dedicated to it. And why? Well, perhaps because of the bad publicity they've had in the past. For example, lying about their profits, or again, in terms of products that they've been offering, and in terms of just service to customers. So we can have a look at... we can see that they've got a lot of, there's a tab about charity of the year and all the work they're doing for charity, and even community champions, so therefore showing that they are concentrating on the community. The environment, which is obviously a hot topic with climate change at the moment, suppliers and ethical trading, health, community impact, our people. So a lot of the factors that I've mentioned before with the stakeholder groups have been mentioned here in this tab. And again, it just gives you a bit of an understanding in terms of their what their corporate responsibility is and what they hope to achieve. You should go on the website, have a little look, and it'll give you a really good indication of what CSR actually is. And again, Amazon, I've purposely gone for as well because they've been in the media quite a lot for unethical behaviour, but we can see that they're really focusing on solar panel, sustainability. Again, you're looking at economic impacts, the community, innovation, and sustainability is absolutely crucial. Now, in terms of the benefits of corporate social responsibility, if they communicate their corporate social responsibility and if they show the customer or other stakeholder groups that they care about business ethics, then obviously it's going to improve the reputation of the company. And in terms of that reputation, it should, again, lead to higher sales. Because as soon as you've got that negative reputation or that bad publicity, then it's going to bring about customers, stakeholders discussing what that company stands for, and if they don't agree with what the company stands for, then they're going to try and switch to other competitors, especially if some of these companies are in very competitive markets. Now, this is something that I found really interesting. It looked at BMW and Unilever, which are obviously in completely different industries, but it looks at it says, case in point, says Prado, and all I've done is just literally found this in an article and kind of just cropped some of it out. So it's a comparison between Unilever and BMW. Both companies are industry leaders in terms of social responsibility, yet BMW has been placed fourth and earning 73.9 points in the CSR survey, which is carried out for firms, 8.1 points higher than Unilever, which is placed 88th. Now, they do similar things. As I've mentioned before, they're industry leaders. The only difference being is that BMW communicate more to their stakeholders than Unilever. So therefore, another reason why the CSR there is there for communication. It's there to try and, I suppose, almost like a marketing gimmick in a fashion, to try and show customers this is what they're doing, this is what their values are, this is what their ethics is. And again, if you communicate it effectively, like BMW are obviously doing, then it is going to bring about more customers. But if you're doing all this work and you're not communicating it, then from a profitability point of view, you can argue what's the point? Because there is always going to be a trade-off with ethics and cost. And if they're doing all this, I mean, again, you could argue, well, yeah, but they're doing it because they care. And that might be the case, but at the end of the day, the business is there to make a profit as well. So therefore, if you're going to do all this ethical strategy, then you have to obviously communicate it to the stakeholders as well. So companies are not communicating what they do, their good deeds, said Prado. A lot of times we see that companies have a lot of people who do not know a lot about what they're actually doing, or people that have a very neutral opinion. If they're able to communicate, they can build their reputations, and reputations build businesses. So think about the brand image. Now, in terms of theory, one of the models for ethics and corporate social responsibility is Carroll's corporate social responsibility pyramid. Now, again, there's different elements. We've got the economic responsibilities, and that's to do with the business in general. What is it about? It's there to be profitable. But then you've got the legal responsibilities, which they have to abide by, so obeying the law. Then they've got the ethical responsibilities of what I've mentioned before, and then they've got, I suppose, above and beyond, and the philanthropic responsibilities of being a good corporate citizen. So that's going above and beyond with ethics. Now, this shouldn't be a pyramid that you start from economic responsibilities and you go up, and you aim for legal, then you aim for ethics, you aim for the next step. It should be all done in tangent, okay? So Carroll argued that different elements can bring about tensions, with some firms believing that trade-offs may have to occur. So, for example, some companies believe that the economic responsibilities may experience a trade-off with, for example, philanthropic or ethical responsibilities, and the reason for that is the cost factors. They believe that if you want to be ethical, you can't be as profitable. And they argue that, for example, sourcing local resources or treating the workers as well as possible, it comes at a cost. And unless customers are willing to pay that cost, then the business is going to lose out on profit. Now, some customers are obviously they are concerned with ethics, and it does possibly change their buyer behaviour, and they will try and buy in an ethical manner. But other customers, that might not be the case. Some customers might be more price sensitive, and therefore ethics might be far down their list in terms of buyer behaviour. So there could be some trade-offs. But then you could also look at the point of, well, if your reputation is impacted and you do get negative publicity, then are you actually going to be profitable? Are your sales going to be actually harmed? So there's obviously a catch-22 there. And finally, Carroll also says that some stakeholders are impacted more in terms of one element in comparison to others. And again, I suppose it depends on the ethical factor, it depends on what's going on at the moment. Think about McDonald's. Obviously, they'll probably have shareholder pressure in terms of keeping profits as high as possible and keeping costs as low as possible. But then, because of that, they're doing it in a way which is impacting employees, because employees are not getting a fair salary. So therefore, you could argue, because of this and because of their economic responsibility, their ethical responsibility related to employees is not really being prioritised. And in a previous topic, you can look at stakeholder mapping in terms of that as well.